Sangaitla, everyone. Kanishchish Hawa so much for joining us today for a session that we get to have with somebody that I know Wafla Gidak and I and so many of us here in Alaska hold so close and dear to our hearts. Our distinguished professor, Graham Smith from Aotearoa, our Maori uncle, who has done so incredible work. And we are so honored to be able to spend time with you and to hear from you over the series of discussions that we're going to have. I'll jump into that in a little bit more detail, but first I just wanted to extend a greeting to everyone who's joining us out there for this live stream today and to appreciate your attention and your good thinking about the things that Professor Smith will be sharing with us and the conversation that we will be having through the discussion series. My name is Lagunai Liz Medicine Crow. I'm Tlingit and Haida. I come from Kwan, the mouth of the Don people. This is where I am at today, zooming in from my ancestral homelands of my Tlingit people. I also am Haida, and I come from Haida Guai, Hikta Hanlai, now known as, currently known as Heidelberg. And I'm the granddaughter of Mona and Tommy Jackson. On my Tlingit side, I am Raven Kachari, freshwater mark sockeye salmon. On my Haida side, I am an eagle, Chichkitne woman, and our crest is the hummingbird. And I get to work for First Alaskans Institute. Our vision is progress for the next 10,000 years. And I love that vision because we have a path and a map that our ancestors left us. And we have to be able to steer and work forward together. And I get to do that work with incredible people. And I want to invite my sister, Wathla Gidak, to introduce herself.
Lagunai. Wafal Gidak Hinudi Kiang, Barbara Blake Ya Atsatai Hinudi Kiang. My name is Wafal Gidak. My English name is Barbara Blake. Calling in today from Zantakahini, otherwise known as Juneau, on the homelands of the Tlinkitani. And I am originally from Prince of Wales Island. My family is from Hiktahunglai and Tlawak. On my mother's side, I am Yak Janas, or Raven from the Shark House. My grandfather's people were Thlay the dog salmon people, and my father's people are from Chestachina. My father is Otnath the Baskin, and I'm the daughter of the Nelchina, the Sky clan on my father's side. It's an honor to be with everyone today, and so excited to hear from Uncle Graham and this wonderful conversation to kick us off and to really learn and engage and just really absorb all of the juicy bits from the amazing path that our Maori brothers and sisters have taken in the world of education and reclaiming that space for their children. And so looking forward to this next hour or so with Uncle Graham to have this conversation. So Bunishchish Awa.
Yeah, Bunishchish Watlakirak. I want to share a little bit about this, these sessions that we have today and a couple more that are scheduled. And then we're going to hand it over so that Professor Smith can share his presentation with us. But I want to give you some context. And that context is that we are in a discussion in Alaska right now about compacting over public education with tribes, with the state, with the federal government. What does that look like? What will it do for us? How will it transform our education outcomes that we know are disproportionately and inequitably impacting our children, our communities, our families, the things that we care most about? And so to help us have this conversation and to engage others in it, we've established a 3-part session. The first one here with Professor Smith. He's going to share what they've done in New Zealand, give us that background, that development. The second one will also be with Professor Smith and Bentham Ohia, talking more about that self-determination element of the work that was done and how it actually rolled out on the ground. And then the third one will be with Professor Smith, his wife, Professor Linda Smith, and our invited guests from our Alaska Native leaders and educators to talk about what's possible here in Alaska. So this first one, we just wanted to really just have some time to listen and learn about what happened and the transformation that was made possible in Aotearoa with our brothers and sisters to the south of us. Professor Smith, so many people have heard you at the Alaska Federation of Natives, sharing your vision and the work of your community with us. And we're so grateful for your time with us today. And with that, I'm just going to hand it over to you.
Kia ora, thank you very much. And first of all, kei te haere tonu ngā mihi ki a koutou katoa I tērā taha o te ao. So just greetings to my friends and relatives in the other side of the great ocean of Te Moana Nui a Kiwa, the Pacific Ocean. And my Māori name is Hinganga Roa. I'm speaking to you from my mother's ancestral land, where I'm just situated at the moment. My father comes from a totally different tribe, so I just want to acknowledge that on my Taitanga Hauiti side. I am very pleased to share with you humbly where we are up to in the struggle that I've been sharing with many of you over the years, as we have attempted to make progress with our education and schooling outcomes here in New Zealand. So with that, I'm going to share a presentation, and I apologise for the fact that I speak to a lot of slides. I know some of us Indigenous minds get a bit bothered by long PowerPoints, but I've always found this a very easy way to share what's going on in our neck of the woods, because it's hard to convey many of the issues in words when a simple photograph or picture can do that very quickly. So I do want to just again say this is where we are up to. Certainly the big vision is still not realized, but have made tremendous progress along the way to modeling some of the excellence that we have been able to establish through our new schooling and language revitalization pathways. So just let me just bowl into it. I want to begin this presentation by making this statement, and hopefully this may just lock us all into, I think, a task that faces most Indigenous communities, whether you're in Alaska, but I often find that this sort of view is shared by most Indigenous peoples around the Pacific Rim. And that is, we will not have a sustainable revolution of our social, cultural, and economic conditions of high and disproportionate levels of underdevelopment without a prior or simultaneous education and learning revolution. This is why education and the struggle for education is important. And it's on this basis really that has situated our struggle and development here in New Zealand. Just to share some quotes from Indigenous voices from my work, I've had the privilege of engaging with many of our Indigenous communities around the Pacific Rim. And time to time, I pick up these little pearls of wisdom that they share with me. And I like to share them with you. So here's one from Janine from the Okanagan Nation. You know, the biggest mistake I made was that I thought I was going to school to learn. And that sort of struck me as summing up quite a bit of the issues related to the assimilation element of education. Another one was, not everything I know was learned in institutions. there are also important things I learned at the feet of my grandparents. And this sort of draws attention to the need to respect that not all education is in institutions, that our communities, our elders, and our local knowledge is an important part of our total learning as Indigenous people. And so we need to find a happy marriage between the institutional learning and our community learning. And then finally, which is really the crux of this presentation, I think, today, and trying to excite all of you to think seriously about what might be done to re-envisage your education and schooling in ways that are more satisfactory, in ways that are more responsive to the underdevelopment elements that we still suffer in high and disproportionate numbers. And this quote is from Dr. Lee Brown in Canada. Our peoples are still suffering. They are ill. Education is both our illness and our medicine. And it's that duality that I want to pick up in the discussion as we go through today. It's really understanding the illness, what's going wrong with education. So, and also then positioning the answers that we are suggesting that work for us as being a response to that analysis. So if I put it this way, that we need to accurately understand what is going wrong with our education and schooling in order to come at it and to change it with accurate interventions. So it's that space that I'm exploring today. I do not, the stuff that I'm excuse me, that I'm talking about is not just about me alone. And this is a little bit again of my whakapapa or genealogy, but I'm a voice that is of many people's experiences. I'm able, from my privileged position as an educator, to share many things that I've learned and seen and to apply them. And that's one of my roles, which I take seriously. That's one of the reasons why I think it's important that I do speak out when I'm invited. So I do also want to say that many of the things that I'm sharing with you, again, are not things that I've just read about or studied in the abstract form. All of the things that I talk about, I've actually done myself. It's what I call getting blisters on your hands. So I appear in a lot of the pictures that you see. And the reason is that because I do these things in a practical, manifest way. And that's one of my invocations to our community of academics and scholars, is that don't just talk about it, get out there and do it, build it, show me in a visible way what has been done in terms of the transforming. So that's the reason why I'm sort of heavily involved in the I guess the stuff that I'm talking about, is that I'm often reporting on projects and interventions that I've actually done and been involved in myself. So I want to start with where we began. So in the 1970s, our language was really out the back door. It was suggested that we were in the last throes of language death. In the 1970s, that was a study done by Richard Benton. And so it was quite a depressing time because, as you know, we were the baby boomers. We had experienced 2 world wars. Our grandparents still remembered the economic depression that affected the whole world. And you know, and every time we went to visit our grandmother, you know, we would, she would be telling us stories of what they couldn't eat during the depression and so on. So we certainly heard and felt the damage that was done by that. Also in the 1960s in New Zealand, there was a lot of urbanization in the post-war period of Maori soldiers having been away, experienced a sort of a different world outlook, came back and began to shift from our rural communities into the cities. And this, of course, and I know this is being experienced in Alaska as well, that there's a lot of disconnection, cultural disconnection, and a lot of issues that result from rapid urbanization and cultural dislocation and all those sorts of things. Education is implicated in a lot of these things. And so I'll get to that along the way. So in this period with all of this sort of depressed state and all of these issues, we see the rise of Maori resistance and protests beginning. Oh, and I've just a little aside here, I thought I'd throw this in, which speaks to an anomaly that confronted us, that during the Second World War, Maori Battalion defended the foothills of Mount Olympus in Greece. And my uncle, who is he's from here, in fact, his son just lives probably about 500 meters from where I'm speaking, and he's shown in the picture there, was one of the last soldiers left on the mountain when the rest of the Maori Battalion pulled out in the defense of Mount Olympus. The reason I'm sharing this story with you is because the irony is not lost on us, is that here are Maori struggling to defend our language, knowledge, and culture in our own country, defending one of the bastions of Western forms of knowledge that derives from Mount Olympus and the Greek gods and all of that knowledge and so on. So that's just a little aside there with my Uncle Joe Hiroti. But back to the storyline. So that period in the 1970s was a great period of social change. It was fortunate that my university studies at that time coincided with this great period of resistance and challenge and student unrest, really. So we learned a lot of things very quickly about the conscientization of our position, that is, coming to critically know the issues that were impacting Maori language, knowledge, and culture, and Maori social and economic livelihoods as well. So it was a period when I was at university where civil rights were very much in the picture. The women's movements were on the rise. Black power in the United States, the anti-Vietnam protests were going on. Here we had our own Maori resistance movements, Ngā Tamatoa. We had the Polynesian Black Panthers here, which modeled themselves on the Black Panther movement in the States. And the 1981 Springbok tour, the South African rugby team touring here, invoked a heck of a lot of protest. In fact, it was a very important phase in our protesting and resistance lives, if you like, because it brought together not just Maori protesting, but also a whole lot of middle class non-Maori people who were protesting against the apartheid system in South Africa. So you got this sort of merging of the idea of wanting to transform and change things. And against all this backdrop, there's this ongoing Maori education and schooling crisis. Maori, just failing at schools, being forced to through an assimilatory sort of education system. So I won't spend time on this slide, but it's just really that again, following the work of other Indigenous academics. This is about storytelling, and the point that I was making earlier of being speaking to the practical life stories that I've done. So the first story I want to share with you is about colonization through education and schooling, and the Captain Cook experience. So where my father grew up was one of the places in New Zealand where Captain Cook landed. And there's a lot of history about Captain Cook there. The streets are named after various voyages on the Captain Cook expedition. You know, the bakery was called the Endeavour Bakery. The main street is Bank Street and all of that. So we're very heavily implicated in the Captain Cook story, as are a number of Indigenous peoples around the Pacific Rim. So we share the Pacific Ocean, we share Captain Cook, even as far away as Alaska. And that history is important to understand. And it's also a history, because it's shaped by British colonialism, that allows me to sort of also make some reasonable comparisons, because our history is shared in terms of our colonization experience in many ways. Right, Captain Cook arrived here in New Zealand, brought with him as scientists who immediately set about the task of renaming our world, changing our Indigenous titles and names of the landscape, of the plants and fauna, plants and the fauna into English terminology. He renamed our world, and that's the beginning, really, of the major impact of colonization. So, virtually every country around the Pacific Rim where Captain Cook went has a statue of Captain Cook. And of course, Anchorage is no exception. I must say that the hotel, the Cook Hotel, has got lots of lovely pieces of artwork, also from Captain Cook's expeditions and so on. So the problematic is, since that time, is that education and schooling has been very much about assimilation. That is, schooling has been very much about trying to fit us into a preconceived Western ideal of what an educated person might be. And an important part of that process has been the denial of our cultural ways of thinking, speaking, doing, and the assertion and the dominance of the Western non-native cultural interests and knowledge. So in a sense, that's that illness that Lee Brown was talking about. It's caused us great ill in terms of undermining the credibility of our knowledge systems, and worse than that, has often led to the loss of language and the loss of culture, the loss of our feeling of identity, the loss of our mana, of our personal prestige, and people feeling very lost as a result of being assimilated out of their culture and into something that they don't fully understand sometimes. So we went through the normal process of colonization. First, the mission schools came in, and the missionaries were wanting to save the heathen Maori from their bad ways of living, and to bring us into a more godly existence. And so education and mission schools played an important sort of part in that. Then we had a wave of education which was deliberately designed to build a labor class amongst Māori, that young Māori girls were to be good housekeepers, servants, if you like, for the big white households, the non-native households. And so they learned skills like sewing and housework. And it was very much about turning them into domestic help. How to serve tea, how to be mindful of their manners and so on. And then we had another evolution in schooling where they began to teach a bit more knowledge, and we experienced very much the old form of education, which was treating the child as an empty vessel and you just filled their heads with new knowledge. And so here's a teacher on the left there teaching about fish, when probably most of those kids in that classroom there know more about fishing than she does. And she's probably never ever been out fishing, as I know that many of the rural communities in Alaska have great fishing traditions, and it would be an affront just to be told, this is a fish, these are its gills, it has a tail, and so on, very simplistic education. And just to bring it back to myself, this is on the left there, or Kotete School. The little girl in the white pinafore is my grandmother. And then on this other side is the local school from Wanganui, where I'm sitting now, where our marae is, our cultural base for our tribe. These are pictures of all my uncles and aunties, actually, in that school. And both of these schools are Maori schools, and in many ways they were set up by Maori communities because they didn't have any schools in their area. So that Okotete school on the left, the land was donated by my great-grandfather. My grandfather hosted a whole lot of the school events at his house because he had a big farm in that area. And the school on the right, the same thing, was set up by land donated from the Maori community, and they had to pay to bring a teacher in the first instance. So we had to seek, if you like, our own education, albeit we were seeking an education that in the end was an assimilating sort of an agenda. And then, as I said, in the 1970s and a little bit earlier in the 60s and 70s, a lot of protests. But in the 1980s, early 1980s, the protest on the right is where Māori school kids from across New Zealand are elected to walk out of schools as a protest, that they felt that schools did not serve their interests. And so there was a major protest across the nation, and kids walked out of school for a day and marched on the streets. It's actually quite interesting about that protest, because I've met some people who are in very high positions, like Supreme Court judge, who was actually part of those protests of walking out of schools. So one of the important things that needed to be unlocked when we're confronting assimilatory education is what we call deficit theory. And I know most of us should be onto this now. The unfortunate thing is that it's only just been recently that we've got rid of principals, school principals, who still believed in deficit theory. And essentially deficit theory said there's something wrong with these Māori kids, there's something wrong with their culture, there's something wrong with the way they live that is contributing to their underdevelopment and their lack of achievement in schools. And this lack of achievement in turn leads to a low socioeconomic lifestyle, which in turn feeds back into this underdevelopment in education. So all of these deficits were seen as contributing to this cumulative cycle of underdevelopment. The problematic here, of course, is that it can continue to point the finger for all of these issues at us, at the Indigenous students, at the Indigenous communities. So we were not only being assimilated, we're also blamed for our underdevelopment and lack of progress in schools. And of course, the problematic with that is that it didn't ask some critical questions of the way in which schooling was being conducted. And so that actually changed in the 1970s as well, particularly following a lot of the what was called the new sociology of education in Britain, they began to challenge the structures of schooling. So one of the responses in New Zealand after, well, actually not after, but sort of a change in direction, but deficit theory still going on, was what we call self-esteem theory. And I need to unpack this a little bit too, because I know that many schools in our Indigenous communities are still utilizing self-esteem theory. And self-esteem theory goes something like this. If we recognize, value, cater, practice for cultural difference, that is, and if we bring this into the schooling environment, you know, we say kia ora in the morning to our kids, and we put some pictures on the wall of some of the cultural events. If we go and visit the museum and we see the Māoris in the museum, the way they used to live, and if we bring an elder into the classroom to do a bit of talk on the old ways of living, and we bring some of the mothers in the community in to put a feast on for all the kids, traditional feast and so on, that all of these sorts of events will make the kids feel really good and positively reinforced about their culture. And then this will create an environment where learning will more likely occur. And the problematic with this is when we ask the question, well, what learning? And when we delve into it much deeper, we find it's really a whole lot of sugar-coated candy activity to help the same old colonizing curriculum to go down. And so the self-esteem approach has been unpacked as well here in the New Zealand environment. So we've sort of shifted to engaging with the system, but we have to think carefully about how we change the system as well, because sometimes we can just do surface things that look good, but actually distracting from getting on with the deeper task of changing the curriculum. And so we do decorative things in the school, like build a lovely, beautiful house, as we did here at the University of Auckland. But it's not just about having a flash house that's important, it's what you do in it that's important. So the unfortunate news is that colonization has not gone away, even in this day and age. More often, it's simply changed shape and is coming at us in many different forms. And many of these new forms are often related to the new economic expectations of what we call the neoliberal economic context. And I know that in the United States that many people have felt the excesses of this kind of approach over recent years. So when I say that colonization hasn't gone away, it's coming at us in many different shapes. And so that requires us to respond to colonization also similarly. That is, we need to have multiple resistances, if you like, to these multiple shapes. So it's a struggle in the curriculum. It's a struggle for in our community consciousness. That is, we've got to struggle with many of our own community who have been seduced by the belief that there's something wrong with us in terms of our educational underdevelopment, and that we need to work harder and all these sorts of things to be successful. Now that works for some kids, but for and that's fine. But for a lot of our kids, they don't want to be a total mini English person or a non-native. They want more often than not. They want to have excellence in both worlds. So I'm not saying it's a movement away from this non-native or non-Aboriginal education. I think it's actually being able to have a total education that maintains a balance between both life needs and lifestyles. But from our point of view, because colonization hasn't gone away and it's got this knack of reforming itself, our struggle is without end. We need to be vigilant, constantly vigilant, and constantly in a notion of resistance and struggle. And again, I'll make the statement that if we really want to change our social and economic situation that disproportionately impacts our Indigenous communities, then we need to also have a simultaneous revolution inside our education, or our way of education. So in New Zealand, and I don't want to dwell too much on this because it's pretty well known, and you've heard this before from me, but we had the Kurapapa Maori Revolution in New Zealand. We call it a revolution in terms of change. It wasn't a violent or revolution. It was a revolution of our minds. So and it started with the Kohanga Reo in 1981, where parents we got the bad news in the 1970s that Māori language was dying. And so parents got together, communities got together, and eventually a strategy came up which involved, excuse me, bringing together people who could speak the language and putting our babies with them in these language nests, and submitting these kids to a total immersion language environment and cultural environment. And when these kids turned 5, they needed to go to school, and eventually we had to struggle to build our own schools, again, to receive these kids, and schools that were built around a total language environment, and also a totally different curriculum emphasis. So I want to say here that there's a number of things that I'll pick up as I go through on this, but I want to say them now so you get the some of the thinking early on. So again, I want to say we can't keep doing the same. This is what drove us to make a change. We can't keep on doing the same things that are not working. That's what we were thinking at the time. That's what we said, that we needed to change the way we were being educated. And so people would say, well, you know, how do you know it's going to work? Because it was very much from our point of view in those early days, an experiment. And our view was, we can't do any worse than what is happening to us now. We're failing in great numbers, and our kids are disillusioned. They don't want to go to school and things like that. And fortunately, we were successful, and these schools were taken up in great numbers, and the kids were very satisfied with what they were getting in their education. And we were saying things like, we want to create options that support both the revitalization of our language, knowledge, and culture, and as well as improve our learning. So there's two things going on here, not just the language revitalization, but also improving our learning outcomes. So part of this was that we knew what the core curriculum expectations were of the non-native schooling, and we incorporated the things that were important to us from that, and we taught some of the core curriculum things that we thought were important, including around science and mathematics and stuff like that, as well as our own cultural expectations. So in that sense, wasn't an either or, and we had this dual expectation of our success. A key element that we were saying to ourselves was that the answers are within ourselves. This is the self-development idea that if we want to be assured that we're going to get it right and that it's going to fit us, we need to do it ourselves, because relying on others and the system to do it has up until that point been entirely unsuccessful. I have to say that over time, we have worked with the system, but we've spoken back to the system from a position of strength, because we built these schools outside of the system. And once they were working, we then talked back to the system. And now most of these schools are publicly funded as an alternative. So and we understood that Maori are not homogenous in respect of their educational aspirations. We know that there's some of our parents do not want to, their cultural stuff, they want to pursue, you know, a totally English and education and schooling outcome, and that's fine. We're not trying to ram this down everyone's throats. We were saying we needed to create a viable and excellent option for Maori who wanted to be Maori, and to provide a excellent option that actually enabled children to have a real choice as to what they wanted to do with their lives, whether they wanted to work in the Maori community or they wanted to work in the wider world, but they had the skills to be able to access both. Overall, we knew that Maori still wanted to be Maori. Maori still needed to be Maori, because we still operate as a society. A lot of our traditional rituals and events where the language, knowledge, and customs are important. So a key strategy in all of these schooling movements was to regenerate the power of our traditional family existence, that our extended families were important. And if they were operating well in terms of the support for each other, that much of the work for these schools and the learning could be enveloped by that support infrastructure. So we've got different elements of kaupapa Māori now, the early childhood movement, the elementary school movement, the secondary school movement, and tertiary educations. And there's a range of tertiary educations, from the sort of polytechnic type model to a university model of higher education. And we've engaged in kaupapa Māori theorising and kaupapa Māori research. But all of these things are just packages for what I call the real revolutionary magic, the real transforming magic. And the real transforming magic inside all of these packages was a shift in thinking by Maori, a shift from thinking from being reactive to what was happening to us, to being proactive in taking more control of what we wanted to do and how we wanted to take responsibility for change for ourselves, and not waiting for other people's permission to do it. So the preschool language nests before kids were 5 were just bundled into all sorts of garages, church halls, and away we went with the language revitalization. I'm sorry, that's a bit out of, but that was one of the first elementary schools was John Waititi, started by Peter Sharples, and the sign on the right is the second school started by Kathy Jews in Ruamata. And so there were two schools. They were dealing with their kids that came from their preschool language nest. And then a whole movement began called the Kurapapa Maori movement in the Auckland area, and this is where a group of us became involved. And our involvement was aimed at changing the schooling system to provide schools for all of the kohanga graduates that were starting to come through, because those two schools were serving just two kohangas, and yet there were by this stage starting to get up into the hundreds of kohanga reos. So this is the beginning of Kurapapa Maori schools. This is actually the group. These are fluent Maori language teachers and elders who were doing a teacher's college course at the time, and I co-opted as part of that development with the first school. And we set up the first school. Then we occupied another school because we didn't have any premises. And you can see the ratty-tatty conditions that we were in. They were abandoned classrooms and so on, where we had to occupy them. It was a genuine occupation because the police came and were wanting to remove us. And we won that battle. And all the way along, there's been this incremental growth in terms of growing the school and the responses. But we changed the way these schools operated, with elders helping with the kids and so on. We taught the parents to language and after school hours so that the language could be supported in the home. Then the schools started to spread all over the country, and these are different schools. That right-hand photograph at the top was a major pedagogy, a teaching methodology, which is tuakanatena. Older kids have responsibility to help nurture and pass on knowledge to younger kids. And that was an important part of our traditional values and so on were important. So everyone was able to, not just speak the language, but to perform the ritual elements as required in our own language. So that Auckland Teachers College, that's where we started an early model of the school, which was great. The Teachers College allowed us to operate and experiment there. And that's what I was doing there. That girl with the pink played for, in that for Z photo, played for New Zealand under 19 netball. And she's a professional netballer. Actually, I think she's finished now. She's also doing her doctorate at one of the wānanga. Again, tuakanatena. The girl in the foreground, Rahera, she's now a doctor at one of the teaching Māori language at one of the universities. We started our own teacher training program, and currently in the institution I'm working with, we have a big teacher education, Kaupapa Māori teacher education program at the moment. So it has about 70 students in it. We had to change the Education Act to, after these schools started to develop and we became more prolific, we ended up having to challenge the government and to change the Education Act to include Kaupapa Māori schooling. And so one of the stories there was that we were in the throes of doing this, and after making submissions, the Ministry of Education said, well, the essential argument you're making is that these schools have a different philosophy. What is it? And we sort of all knew it, but we hadn't written it down. So we said, hold that thought, we'll be back next week. And we went away, and we, that group on the right, spent time writing it down. And that has become known as Te Aho Matua. And it was gazetted, and it's been included in the Act, which establishes these immersion language schools as a schooling type in New Zealand education system. So in that right hand photograph, you can see the kids are looking in that rocky pool, and they're seeing two education scenarios. One is they see, the typical rocky shore, bipods and bivalves and crustaceans and all of that. But they also see, in speaking in Māori in that, because it's a Māori experience, they are saying things like, oh, look at that big, fat, juicy kina. I'd love to eat that. Which a kina is a sea urchin. So again, the real revolution in the 1980s was a change of mindset of waiting for others to make change for us to doing it ourselves. So part of this was, so that was the language sort of side of things, but part of this is, and this is a point where, I need to make, is that a lot of people don't do the critical thinking associated with establishing this kind of educational response. We need to do two things simultaneously. We need to challenge the politics that would diminish these schools, and we need to make the political space for these schools to exist. So that requires us to think carefully and to be conscious about this. And this is why what we call as critical theory is being important. That is, we need to accurately understand what's going wrong. So we need these tools to start to unpick what's going wrong, and then to so that we're able to come up with the correct interventions and answers. So part of my work was in my PhD was to look at all of these Māori responses, kohanga, the preschool, the kura, the elementary schools, and to ask the question, what's the magic transforming elements that are inside these schools? And after questioning lots of parents, nailed this down to 6 key elements. And what the point was that if these 6 key elements are to some extent in place, then it's more likely we're able to have a successful intervention in education. And beyond that, the reason I wanted to establish this sort of as a theory of transforming was, can we pick these elements up and apply them in other areas to make change? So today, they've been so widely interacted with, I wouldn't say absolutely taken up in this way, but they've been interacted with to the extent that most government departments now have a Kaupapa Maori unit inside them. And they're trying to capture this transforming element. So, but back to the critical perspective, and I'm just going to rush through these. I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but we need to develop this critical outlook to situate our transforming initiatives inside of. So we need to, that's the point I've already made, what's going wrong. We need to understand structuralist and culturalist impediments. That is, what are the impediments that people made, and then what are the impediments that are in the system, that are systemic issues? And we need to be able to respond to both those forms. We need to understand that colonization is coming at us in multiple ways, and be prepared to respond. And there's all sorts of different faces of colonization, and some that we don't think of, but disproportionate and structured indebtedness. That per capita, Maori are more indebted than most other people. Hegemony is a concept when the colonized come to believe in ideas that are detrimental to their own existence, so that they, when they take those ideas on, they're actually helping to form their own colonization. So the best way to colonize a people is to have them colonize themselves. So this is what we mean by we need to decolonize the mind of people to get them to see how that some of this thinking is actually manufacturing the consent of the dominant group to have their way with us, etc., etc. The third point I would say is that we need to understand the neoliberal economic context. And, I don't need to say too much about this to an Alaskan audience, because you probably experienced a lot of this stuff over the last few years, but the hegemony of the trickle-down economy is still prevalent here in New Zealand, where the elite big companies and so on continue to have us believe that they need to do well and to make huge profits, because when they do, it will trickle down to the benefit of those of us who are in the poorer echelons of our society. And a lot of people believe in the trickle down, but again, it's been challenged as not working. The primacy of individual rights and freedoms, that the individual comes first, and that's fine up to a certain point. But for Indigenous communities, we often have responsibilities as extended family, as village members, as tribal members, that go beyond just our individual rights. So, this tension is also seen in wider society, and it might be also seen as in the arguments over vaccination and non-vaccination, where some people would say you need to vaccinate because it's for the benefit of the collective. And then others saying, I don't want to vaccinate because it's my individual freedom that's at stake, and so on. So there's tensions there, etc., etc. You can read this stuff in your own time. The struggle for equity in this context is really important. And particularly in the United States, I think there are issues, because I would say that the African-American view on this issue is different from Indigenous peoples, that the struggle for equality and for equal opportunity is different from equity struggle. So, and by that I mean is that often the equity struggle is about sort of affirmative action and making positive intervention on behalf of people who are already disadvantaged. So if I put it this way, that if you treat everybody exactly the same and argue for a level playing field, then those that are already disadvantaged will remain disadvantaged. So we need to think about this issue. And I think that's one of the things that's been unpacked in New Zealand. I wouldn't say that we've won this completely, because embedded in our acts is this notion of we must treat everyone exactly the same. But in actual fact, in doing so, treating everyone the same, the high and disproportionate levels of inequity that are already present for Māori remain. So we need to struggle. That's important. By struggle, it's not just to be benign and allow some of these things to happen. I think we need to see that by not struggling, we're actually participating in our own colonization. And struggle can take many different shapes. Again, it can be, I don't mean armed struggle or violent struggle, but it means speaking out and speaking back, being informed. And a lot of the struggle it needs to be with ourselves, with our own communities, that some of us are holding our communities back by the way that we think. And so again, it's an issue that it's got many shapes, and we need to be open to change. As we go, we can think of Indigenous ways that we can mobilize some of these changes, which we call Indigenous theorizing. This is the last point here, is that we need to think about transforming, not transformation. Transforming is the verb, and transformation is the end game. And I think that we're constantly trying to change. So transforming is more important. I will leave this for the sake of time and try and get a little bit of a hurry on, but 5 tests of the veracity of the Kaupapa Maori approach. These 5 elements of developed to test how well we're doing if we are arguing that we're applying a Kaupapa Maori approach here in New Zealand. So, and you'll see, criticality, are we being critical? Structuralist and culturalist considerations, are we looking at the system and the people? Praxis, are we in a constant review process? And transformability, are we intentional about the transforming outcomes? So some examples, again, just a quick aside here about the systemic issues that are often in the system. It's about exams, the simulationary trend of schooling. Right, so I'm going to now just flick through these photos. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it, but this is the development of the higher education, the next stage, the higher education movement in New Zealand, where I've been working lately. And just to say that it is possible now to get an education through Māori language, all the way from preschool to a PhD, a doctoral degree in New Zealand. So we've got 3 higher education institutions, and this one is Te Whare Wānanga o Awanuiarangi, where I would work for a while as the CEO. But again, this was a response by a tribe to their local educational community. They were a tribe that had their lands confiscated. They were a tribe centered right in the middle of that the big red patch there in Whakatane. And that bright red is the worst case scenario in terms of health deprivation. So it's positioned right in an area of need. It's built from the ground up by building the first buildings ourselves. And the early curriculum was just some of it was for credentials, some of it was just building our community collectivity. So at this stage, I'm I'm foundation chair of the council of this institution. We took the government to court, to the Waitangi Tribunal, over costings for our buildings, and our argument was that we were held to the same accountabilities as any other New Zealand institution but weren't given the same support to get there, which we won. And we built a whole new campus off the back of that. Just the point there that this Māori higher education institution is not just a set of buildings, it's a set of communities. It's both inside and outside of the campus. And you'll get an idea from these photos of the breadth of where it's at now. So that's our nursing program. It's responding to that big red diagram that I showed you. We're significantly a doctoral granting institution now. We engage with our community at large. It's the local provincial rugby team there. Again, we have after school programs, so we're not just thinking about, tertiary education as being, young adults. We think of also the transition from secondary school. International outreach with other Indigenous communities. So we were asked by the Indian government to help in India with Indigenous communities who, again, they suffer from the same thing, the British colonial process. So again, Indigenous communities wanting to exercise their own cultural sovereignty in many ways through schooling. So just to make some comments here that, we've had this big revolution and it's not finished yet. It's an ongoing transforming process. But I have to say that no one died because there were lots of people at the beginning when we first started off with kohanga and so on, who thought it was a disaster, a calamity was about to befall us, that it was going to be a disaster. We've got everything's going to fall apart and so on, and it hasn't. In fact, it's grown to the point where everyone now, including the government, sort of own the idea of the alternative system. Certainly at the UN, they skite about it as if they had been part of its development. So just to put the record straight, it developed as an alternative community-based initiative, which has been successful and as now enjoys the support of the government and the formal system as an option within the smorgasbord of options of education. Again, I've made those points. I want to make that last one again. It's not just about language, knowledge, and culture revitalization. It also needs to be about understanding the critical politics in which this struggle is situated. And that last point is, again, important. For many of us, we can't do any worse than what the system is doing for many of our kids at the moment. So just to say that, again, when I was asked to reflect on on what's happening in Alaska, just to say that I think that Alaska is in a far better position, I think, in many ways than we were when we first started out. There are many little struggles and things that are going on in terms of confronting, changing, and engaging with education in serious ways that that are really, I think, foundational in terms of where Alaska might choose its pathway going forward. So, and these are just sorts of things I think that there's lots of learning in each of these sites here that are about an Indigenous education pathway. And certainly we use a lot of the stuff that's coming out of Alaska, particularly around cultural standards. I know that the Australian Aboriginal and some of the government initiatives have co-opted a lot of the Alaskan cultural standards into their frameworks. I know that in Kotzebue, the early childhood language nest has very much a relationship with the Kohanga Reo and the Kura in New Zealand. And yeah, I think I've got some other pictures here actually, so I can just share some of these with you just to sort of wrap up. Part of this is also showing that I've been able to get around in Alaska and to meet some key people who I think would inform the way you might think forward with these issues. So here, and I think I had a picture of Itok here as well, so that particular struggle is really significant in terms of, it's not just about, the creating, recreating, if you like, the food source for the villages. It's actually an important part of it is the recreation of Indigenous knowledge. More than that, that struggle actually ended up changing the Act to enable the Indigenous whaling to be continued in a sustainable way. So I'm just sort of mentioning these things about these struggles actually are examples of how you might think your way forward around education, that it is possible to change some of these things. I would say that when I was visiting Barrow, that they had one of their best weeks ever with whaling. And I think it was because my father's tribe is the whale tribe here in New Zealand. If you've seen the movie The Whale Rider, that's where it's centered. And I think all the whales were coming to see me, their relative, and Etok's extended family were pulling them out of the water. Lots of teachers who are dedicated to doing things differently. Of course, Ray and Oscar and their work around that stuff has been very significant. Lots of resources, that are available to you in Alaska to do something that's different and to respond to the current situation in terms of education. Indigenous knowledge is not just a subject, actually. That's one of the things I've learned in New Zealand. When I went to Alaska, I certainly learned that it's it's more than that, more than a subject. It's often about life and death if you live in a rural community and have to survive. We have a treaty in New Zealand that's been helpful to our particular struggle, and I know that that's a difference. But it's not. I don't think it's a difference that can stop you doing the things that you might want to do. So, not for me to say what you should do going forward, but I think you have all the bits and pieces to think creatively about how you might solve some of these issues around education. And so I just again, the woman on the top right there with the moko, she was on CNN recently. She's mainstream music, mainstream newsreader, who was in one of my original Kaupapa Maori classes. And then these are different staff that I work with through my institution here. These are all Kaupapa Maori graduates. So from, and they're all doctors, and then and again, that's just one end of the spectrum. There's a lot of our graduates who are doing things in our communities that are more cultural leadership, who are building powerful language experience, and who are building families who are committed to our cultural revitalization. So they're all important parts. Those ones that I've just showed you are ones that I work with in my particular work here at my institution, actually, through my institution. That's it. As we say in Māori, kumutu and ane, I've now finished. Thank you for listening.
We'll be right with you here, just removing the spotlight so we can join you. And do you want to stop sharing your screen?
Yes,
And
I'll
then
do that.
we can both be on here with you. There we go. And we're back. Let's change this up. Well, wow. Where to start? I have so many questions, and I just can't thank you enough. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and kind of the walking through the response that you folks have taken in Aotearoa to ensure that your children and your families have the best available education. I mean, that what I heard you just deliver is the development of the best possible education for our Native children. And I have so many questions, but I wanted to start first by just saying, thank you so much. I know we might have a limited amount of time with you, so just before we start asking you questions, I just wanted to do a time check. How much more time can we hold on to you for?
I'm good.
Oh, you're good? Okay, wonderful. Yeah. Wonderful. I also just wanted to, maybe to just start with one of the things that you said that really resonated with me, because this is kind of the sky is falling moment for a lot of people as they try to imagine what it would look like for tribal compacting over public education in Alaska. And the point that you made about like no one died.
Yeah.
No one died. Education still moved forward. We were able to create and build something that was really reflective of what we needed. And can you share a little bit about like at the time of those conversations and the fear factor not just from the Western education system and educators and all the people who are so invested in it, but also even from perhaps your own people. What were some of the things that were being shared, and what were some of the ways that you helped people better understand the transforming work that was happening?
Yes, no, that's a very good and important part of this whole development. Actually, was dealing with partly the conscientizing of some of our own who were heavily invested in the myth that they had to go and get a full-on Western sort of education, that was the way ahead. And then I think we'd had sufficient experience of that failing, a significant number of our people, that somehow the penny started to drop for enough of us to say, you can't keep on doing this. We need to try something different. And so that was part of it. The other part was that we deliberately went out and actually addressed some of our community concerns. And although we didn't want to get involved in what I call the politics of distraction, where you're constantly having to explain yourself to others who are, and there is a balance between being polite and explaining what you're doing to just getting on and doing it, and the proof being in the pudding of its success. So we did all of that sort of balancing act, but I do know that Linda spent quite a bit of time writing some documents like 25 questions that you always wanted to ask, and wrote it into a small, easy to read pamphlet and answered the questions for them. Put the question and then the answer underneath. And we got on the front foot with that and did that. So we were doing that not just for Māori communities, but for a lot of the non-Māori communities who were in powerful positions, who were getting in the road. But I think the point that you're making is quite right. That a lot of the lack of confidence is amongst some of our own people who've been either heavily invested in the existing system to the point they can't withdraw from it or see alternatives. So, and I hope I made the point that actually we're not saying that one size fits all here, that if you want to do that kind of education and have that pathway, you should. And by all means, go for it. But the part that's missing is the part that caters for our language revitalization and our communities, and in particular, I think the rural community lifestyle in Alaska. How do we, when I was there, often pondered to myself about how do you fit these young people for a lifestyle in their own community and to be credentialed along the way with a system that recognized, the ability to trap and hunting skills and so on, how to fix an engine on a snowmobile and all of this sort of thing, the skills they need for a life, a successful lifestyle in the village, rather than as it has happened here. A lot of the boarding school phenomenon was about removing our kids from their communities, and removing them from the communities, removing them from their culture. And so when that happened, it's very hard for those kids to go back into there and to fit in. They're often the outsiders, and they've often been educated out of their culture and find it difficult to get back in. I think these are anomalies that and I do know that this is worry some of the community members in Alaska already about how that might be sorted. But again, not everyone has to do this simultaneously at the same time. You can actually sponsor some models, of where this can be modeled as successful. I look at the Kotzebue School and I think there's a lot in their environment that could teach us here in New Zealand. There's it's not a one-way ticket here in terms of certainly in terms of my engagement. When I wander around and go and see things, I'm looking for things that can be helpful to us in our own home. So it's a two-way thing for me. But yes, we need to. That's what's called hegemony, and I often go to communities, when the elders are all sitting around and I say, we need to learn about a word called hegemony. I say this to them direct. So I say, right, all repeat after me, hegemony. And they go, hegemony. So then I say, pick up your teeth and put them back in. But hegemony is a way of thinking which makes us believe in our own colonization. So we believe in the dominant perspective without, even though it may be detrimental to our long-term existence. And so we need to see that phenomenon of hegemony, which Chomsky calls manufacturing consent. So you get the oppressed to consent to their oppression. You get the colonized to consent to their colonization. You get the marginalized to consent to their marginalization by believing in these myths. So that's an educational program in itself. And that's that critical consciousness that we need to somehow get some critical tools to unpack some of that stuff without getting in, because it can be overwhelming. And I apologize if some of the language I used today was a little bit overwhelming for people, but it's the way in which it's benefited us. So I'm just sharing that. You might find your own words that fit better.
Yeah, Kunishish, how see if I'm going to practice Hinangaroa. Did I get that right? Okay.
Correct.
And, Chinan, for your words, and I'm just so thankful for all of this. Just almost feel like crying as I listen to what is possible, and watching my son struggle throughout his entirety of pushing against a system that doesn't include him or doesn't represent who he is. And I'm just so thankful for what you brought to us. And I'm going to ask the question that I'm sure that a lot of folks have, and it has to do with resources. And I've heard you describe how starting with very little and what that looks like, and just really moving it down the road, irregardless of funding coming through the door. And just wanted to ask you about that a little more, and maybe have you elaborate on that just a little.
Yes, so thank you for the question. It takes a lot of courage. So we began with the preschool initiative of Kohanga, and it was a lot easier because it was an area that was unregulated, if you like. And so we could do what we liked with different buildings and so on to cater for that. And once we had done that, it was much easier. And I think in terms of people's thinking about the whole idea of just doing it in a self-development school and so on. The first two schools were developed with tribal support. So or community support. So there was a marae in West Auckland, which was run by Peter Sharples, which nurtured that school. So they had a strong community, and I would expect that it would probably need that sort of basic infrastructure, a strong community environment that would support the development, to firstly find a building or a vacant space that would be suitable. Here in New Zealand, you could start a school if you had 21 willing parents to do it. And so that was easy peasy because there were heaps of parents who wanted it. It was really a question of trying to, put some barriers around because there's just too many parents wanting to come into some of these schools. So we had to select, if you like. But the thing is that people were prepared to just start. And so I think what we did have was we had good teachers. And so one of the things in the early schools was, and because I was the sort of the one of the first teachers actually, and then the other schools came to us to say, well, we need to start, our community wants to start a school, what do we do? So the first thing I said was, well, you need to send your teacher to us for 6 months. And I used to say, so we can deconstruct them. But in actual fact, I came through the system. I was at Teachers College. I was a lecturer, but I had enough confidence to be able to unpack a lot of the stuff that I'd learned and remold it. And really the key thing to creating an Indigenous teacher is to go with your heart, to go with what you know is right, and just draw down the tools that you need from what you've learned as you're going along. So from time to time, we use the tools that I'd learned, but from time to time, we also embraced our cultural values and ways of doing things. So the teacher is important in setting up this. So if you get a good someone who's willing to do the teaching, someone to where you can get the space, and a community that surround you, that are going to send their kids to the school. So in all of our work in New Zealand, our whole development, the real heroes, in my view, were the parents who took the punt to send their kids. I don't think it was a punt. I think we were sufficiently aware of what was going on to send their kids to this at that time was an experiment. It was a new way of doing things. I think in sharing with you all in Alaska, what I'm saying is, from the New Zealand perspective, I don't think it's too much of an experiment now. I think what the experiment part is how you shape it in the Alaskan form. I think it works. I think there is enough evidence to show there is a relationship between strong identity and learning. And I think there's enough to show that when kids are happy, they learn. And there's enough evidence from our situation which show when the parents are supporting and involved, that the home becomes an extension of the school. A very significant part of this learning. And I haven't met a parent yet who wasn't interested in their kids doing well at learning at school. And it's just that Alaska's got those different environments, which I think, can shape different responses. But I would have thought there's at least two good models that might be one in the urban areas and one in the rural context that is trying to respond to. And again, it's not trying to turn all the kids into hunters and gatherers in the village, but I think they get access to sort of knowledge that that can go either way. They can use it more broadly, but they are fitted for survival in their own lifestyle, should they so choose.
You actually lead right into a question that one of our sisters, Alicia Towns Bain, asked in the Facebook live stream. And it had to do with one of the slides near the end, but you were just kind of touching on it here, which is understanding that what you're creating in a school is not just for teaching language and teaching culture. You're creating an entire new environment for our children to thrive in. And you spoke about it a little bit about making sure that they're being taught in a way that understands the reason that this process and this pathway has to exist in the first place. Could you flesh that out a little bit more for us?
Yeah, it's the critical context is really for parents and for the community at large. So understanding the politics of our existence, the colonization and how that works. In the schooling environment, definitely it's a shift, but it's not quite that critical stuff. I think we would apply outside without involving the kids, directly teaching them critical. You can at the secondary schools and at the tertiary institution, they learn critical politics about our existence. But in the schools, you just do it. I mean, you create an environment for learning that prioritizes our cultural ways of doing things. That the pedagogy that's used is a pedagogy that is consistent with how our kids live in the home and in their communities. They're not going to school and then expected to be some middle class urbanite that the education system has been built around. They're actually going to school as a Native Alaskan and enjoying a Native Alaskan environment. Their values are reinforced, their language is reinforced, their culture is, so if they were in Barrow, for example, if it's the whales are running and they need to go for to attend to their cultural responsibilities with the whale hunt, then away they go. And that's all part of the education.
When you were pursuing the bigger picture, as you started developing past preschool, it almost seemed like there needed to be like a political path as well as the continued education path, or was it just the education path and then it grew from there that people just caught on?
Yeah, so the political path became the politics of necessity, because Kohanga Reo preschool was so successful. We're having all these kids turning 5 years old and lining up ready to go to school, and the only school options available to them were the ordinary schools. And so a lot of these kids started to go to these schools and lose their language. So that became a point for political volatility for the government, in the sense that, what do you do now? We're trying to save our language, and there you are busy not responding. So there was a whole set of politics which we undertook to do. There was again several of us involved in that, which included writing letters to the government, to threatening the Prime Minister of the day with a judicial review because he refused certain things, to engaging with the Ministry of Education, to when we did set up, the schools, we came under a lot of pressure, even though we weren't being paid for, by the government, who felt it was their responsibility to check on these children in these schools. who would come and visit and look at our planning and and fortunately we were sufficiently well served by different parents and so on who were able to do, who were top people in their fields who were able to do planning. So, I would say in those early days, we were more efficient than ordinary schools because we knew we were under the spotlight. But that was easy to do. And part of it is actually, there's a joy part. So it's not when you feel you're doing something really worthwhile that relates to our culture and our knowledge and so on, and that you're making ground and yet you're not standing still while it's becoming overwhelming, we're just being thwarted by the existing school system. When you feel that you're actually being able to respond, there's an energy that comes from somewhere in amongst our parents and amongst our communities to take on the world.
I'm trying not to get teary-eyed. I want this so bad for our kids and our families and our communities.
Yeah.
The system that we have is failing. It's failing them. There are pockets of brightness, as I'm sure there were in Aotearoa at the time that you folks started to go down this pathway. And I think one of the things that would be really helpful to hear as well is, you said earlier in your presentation, that you can't just put some native artwork up in the school and you can't just teach everybody how to say hello and thank you in the native language of the place. Like, you can't just slap some surface covering on it, rebrand the school and think that this is the transformation we're looking for. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about, like, there is a path that some people may choose. You mentioned, like, if you want that path, you want that Western colonial path, then go down that path. But this is the path we're creating. And this path is not just a magnet for students and parents, but it's a magnet for outcomes and success in a much different way. So if you could share some of your thoughts about all of that and how it worked out.
I think you've articulated that really well, Liz, and that's exactly it. It's about creating options, and I think if we can avoid hierarchies of that's better than this and that's, it's just that where parents are at and what they want for their kids, and that's fine. I'm ever hopeful that actually one of the things that where Alaska might get to is the fact that you don't have to do the same struggle that we've done, that perhaps the Ministry of Education, in my view, if they were awake, they might entertain the idea of actually trying to solve this stuff themselves by going down this pathway, by being proactive of finding the resources in a school to allow this to happen and to look at it and to build it as a important pathway, and not be on the other side and be resistant and try and stick up for something that's not working.
Well, and I might ask you to kind of flesh this component out about that as well, which is the difference in Aotearoa that you're speaking of is that this pathway that you folks carved was a public school pathway. It was not a private or a church or a secluded just for this particular group pathway. It was one that was broadly public, and yet it was carved out under the public school umbrella. So could you share about that too?
Yeah, so we thought it needed to be part of the public school offering, given that our communities are poor, they don't have the resources to fund lots of schools, and we thought it's important to point out the shortcomings of the existing system. We were solving, the way I would put it, we were solving a problem that was brought in the system. The system was faulty. And here were Māori parents actually trying to at least solve some of this by building alternative schools that catered for a different desire amongst our parents. And again, I'll say this is, we're not homogenous in what we want, desire from schooling, but the part that's missing, that's not there, is the support for our language, knowledge, and culture. And beyond that, a significant and serious approach to learning success for kids. I think that the system would argue, oh, we're all for learning success for the kids, but it's not working, and they continue to see our kids as the fault, and it's very difficult for them to see that there are systemic issues at play, and there's enough actually international research, and that's what I was pointing to with the new sociology of education, which asks, what counts as schooling? Who says so? And who makes the selection of what counts as knowledge in schools? And the answer is not us. And that knowledge is often, and the curriculum is often selected in the interests of the dominant cultural group to serve their interests. And so there's a need to, and once we'd penetrated that sort of, that understanding, that critical perspective, it became easy for us to say, we want to change the structures to be more accommodating of what we're doing.
You had mentioned pedagogy just a minute ago, and I know you talked about it a little bit, in your presentation, but I was hoping you would expand a little more on. You talked about how the older kids, took on the role as they would in our traditional societies of teaching the younger children, and hoping you could talk about that a little more, because I thought that was a pretty unique and wonderful example of how this works.
Yeah, so we just did what we liked to, again, that we thought was culturally appropriate, that allowed us to educate our kids in a way which was not different because it needed to be different, but in terms of cultural connectedness. So, most of our kura start off with a karakia or a prayer, in the mornings. They still do their kōrero, their like the morning talk, but this is all in the language. So, this is again, and then they may do some of the formal stuff around science and learning or environment. There's a whole range of curriculum that's available to us, both in the system, right? So, the system might be saying, we're doing the rocky seashore, the rocky, shore, and, we can do that too, but we'll do it in our own language and our own cultural framework. So that was, there's no issue there. The pedagogical or the teaching elements here, Tuakana Taina is a particular methodology identified by Tania Kai in her PhD work. There's, I think the other parts were like in our community that reinforcing the way in which our cultural values operated, about what roles were in terms of our speaking roles, and always being welcoming. If someone comes into the learning environment, they're formally welcomed. The pedagogy is also around whānau, extended family. So this is our style. Look, I use this at this university as well. All knowledge belongs to everybody. All knowledge goes in the center of our learning circle. Everyone takes what they need for their own benefit. Our job is to share what we know to the benefit of everyone. Our group is only successful as our least performing member. In other words, our responsibility is to uplift everybody's learning. And we recognize and positively affirm everybody's learning where it's at. So in some of the early kohanga, there was a co-option of one of them of the utilizing the Suzuki method of teaching piano. So the kids would learn to play piano in Māori, but the Suzuki methodology, which is about the person plays, and the whole group there, it's about positive reinforcement. And so the teacher who had been to Japan and speaks Māori and had co-opted this into a Māori pedagogy, if you like, this affirmation for teaching piano to kids. So that you can still open up the curriculum beyond what we would normally learn. Because I've already said that the curriculum is a selection of knowledge made by someone somewhere. When you start your own school, you put yourself in charge of selecting what counts and what doesn't. So if we want to teach, music to preschoolers, that's our prerogative. It's not, they shouldn't learn that until they're in secondary school, and all of that stuff. If we think kids are ready, we will teach them. Our kids, from very early age, learn how to say long karakia or prayers. They can say sing very long songs, cultural songs. Inside those songs, there's a lot of knowledge. So again, these are all pedagogical sort of nuances, but yep, it's an extended family. The classroom is an extended family. And that's why that tuakana teina, the older helping the younger, everyone is supportive. And if it's working well, to be excluded for a while outside of the family group is a real bad punishment, in the sense that people feel it deeply. It's not whacking them. It's a different form of that they've been, that the group feel that they need to sit, to settle, and people feel aggrieved by that. So it's, again, this is not to say, so all the things I'm saying here, excuse me, we have different schools, different models, and different shapes. So it's not all perfect, because we also suffer from teacher supply. A lot of our schools, although we have 70 odd teachers training with us at the moment, there's the demand and supply chain is broken a bit. Mainly, actually, because our teachers are being pinched by the mainstream. I shouldn't use the word mainstream, but I should use the word conventional school. But they're pinched because they're so good, they teach in both languages. They have that capacity. And so they get bought by the system who are struggling to compete, I guess, in the cultural arena. So there's not all of them, but some of them jump the ship.
I wonder if another piece that you might touch on is, and I'm going to try to Hinangaroa.
Correct. Yes.
We'll get there. We'll get there. Is around this notion of how do you know that it's working, right? Because in the public education system in Alaska now, there's this notion that you can only know, and you said it earlier, like the reason that our children are not succeeding in these schools and then in this system is because there's something at fault with our children. And there's that underlying belief. And so the only people who get measured are the children. And the measurements that they use are standardized measurements. And so one of the things that we struggle with when we start talking to people about what could this look like, what does it look like when we are running our own tribal schools in Alaska, publicly funded tribal schools, what does that look like for tracking outcomes, for being able to measure, like you said, you're taking care of the one that is the one that needs the most support moving forward. So what does that look like, you know, from a place that's coming from, we must standardize everything, standardized tests from when they're babies, standardized tests all the way through.
Yeah, we've been fortunate enough to get rid of standardized testing in that way, the regime of it. But I think that Maori also want to have a way of testing and seeing that our kids are making progress. It goes back to that diagram of all those animals being asked to take the same test, please climb that tree. Is that you teach the kids that the things that they're excited about, and so that when they come to do the test, they actually have learned the stuff. They haven't switched off because it does not impact them. So we've got that part, and so a lot of the cultural stuff kids do very well at. There's some stuff that's still a difficulty for them, but not all of them. You don't get doctorates and you don't have medical doctors from our kura, for example, because they didn't do maths. They've all done maths and they've done it successfully, you know, so we've got those sorts of things that are also there, Liz, at the end, you know, of successful outcomes. But also, you can look this up online, of the schools have had some success in the language achievements and cultural achievements. So if you've got kids who are starting off with A's and stuff like that in their significant component, they're on a good start to learning. You can entertain, you know, kids who have got, you know, perhaps C's in maths and stuff like that, if they've also got A's in other subject areas. So it comes out, and there's still students who get A's in maths and sciences and stuff over and above that. So yeah, it's again a controlling mechanism that is often been set up by a one-size-fits-all sort of regime that has excluded the interests of our kids.
I know Wathakirak has another question, but first, how did you get rid of standardized testing?
That was our teacher unions. It was more than just Māori that got rid of those. It was a whole political initiative. we still have testing, but not standardized testing, and it's more formative in a sense.
That's amazing.
And you could do that. You could actually change the system of testing to more formative testing to improve learning. Not testing to measure against the standardized testing is measure against national norms. Well, Indigenous kids are often not in the national norm. They want them to be. But it's a way of just measuring they've already constrained them. And then they want to consign them to that position. The whole system needs to change. And we're also arguing to change that.
There's a toward the end of your discussion, you started talking about the settlements between the government, and then you flashed to this amazing university system that you had built, and wondering through that process of settlement, was there an avenue of education reparations that was built into those conversations?
No, but a good point. It's a good point. So whereas we may have argued for a treaty breach around the expectation that we would be treated the same rights as British citizens, excuse me, which is in the treaty, I think that you could make a case in Alaska for reparations for miseducation.
Can you talk a little bit about the leadership mechanisms for the schools as they developed? As here in Alaska, we have we have an overall state board of education, but then we have local school boards, and the local school boards are elected officials. And they really have a lot of control and authority over what it can be studied by the schools and whatnot. What does that look like within your structure?
Yes, we had a system change, and they got rid of the regional boards of education. And before the regional boards of education got scrapped, the Auckland Education Board helped us to respond, because they understood that their system wasn't working for us. And so they helped us to fund the judicial review of the Prime Minister, who had turned down the establishment of these schools. And in about 3 months, I think it took, he reversed his decision. So we didn't actually go to judicial review. We wrote the letter to say that we were. And he looked at it and then obviously took advice and then reconsidered. So the Education Board, then schools have a board of trustees. And so, and the problematic with that is that boards of trustees operate to a, supposedly are in charge of schools, but actually they operate to a charter that is probably 90% set by legislation at the centre. So they get 10% of the running of the school. But so I'm sort of somewhat skeptical about that sort of process, because in my view, boards of trustees simply have responsibility for schools but no power.
So when you look at one of your schools that's run, a Kurapapa Maori school, for instance, is there like a superintendent and principal structure? I know you said you did away with principals, but what does that leadership structure look like
For
the administration of the school, leadership at the school?
yeah, at the school we have lead teachers or school principals, and yeah, I'm sorry, I've just been distracted by Linda. She's waving at me. Yep. Yeah, so we don't have that superintendent sort of control over schools, and quite frankly, I've seen some of them in operation, and they basically are a problem. I think, particularly, I'm thinking of the Canadian situation where I was for 8 years. But and you have some good ones, and you have some that are out of sync with the cultural dimensions of community. So, I'm not quite sure what the system is in Alaska, but yeah, they can be problematic in my view.
I think
and it might be a reason to abandon, to move outside the system.
Yeah, I think one of the things that people have a hard time just like mentally picturing. So how does this work when a tribe or tribal entity takes over running of a school, right? We're at a different place where we are now in Alaska with our education, because we've already had some really significant legal battles to make sure that the state has to equitably provide education in our villages, and that they have to have schools. So a lot of our villages have beautiful schools now. And then they have this Western hierarchy, well, Western, let's call it the conventional, I think is what you said, a conventional school system out in our villages. So we have buildings already, we have schools already. And so when we try to think about the different pieces that would have to shift and move, one of the pieces that a lot of people have a hard time visualizing is like, so, you'll have teachers, there's always a need for good teachers, doesn't matter like what type of school, you're going to need good teachers, but what is the role of the administration or the leadership of the school? How does that function?
Yeah, so I would, well, the schools, in the Kurapapa Maori schools, is parental control. When they have meetings, every family who has a child has to have a member, a parent or a grandparent who's attending the school meeting, and they make their decisions in that way. From the situation that you've described around the villages, I agree. You could have a flash school. It's like when the picture of the marae, the inside of the house. It could be as flash as you like. It's what you do inside it that counts. That was my point. So if you have a flash school in the village, if what's being taught in there is irrelevant, and it's not meeting the needs of the community, it's just seen as a big Trojan horse, actually, in the communities, bringing assimilation into the community. And so if I was in that community, I would be thinking, how do we capture the school? And I think that the village needs to say, we want to have control over our own school, and probably need to get, because a lot of the stuff is also tied up in union agreements with teachers and whatnot, but probably need to get some form of agreement with teachers a way of providing fairly so that they get a fair shake in terms of the responsibilities that they're asked to do, but at the same time you have a committee that's community driven, who shape the curriculum in the way that they think fit for that community. Now, it's easy for me from here in New Zealand, from the South Pole, giving advice to the North Pole. But you know, that's a way of doing it, and I don't underestimate how hard that can be. But it's to me, there are ways to solve these issues, and I think the first thing to solving them is to enact something, get moving. So, and I'll go back to the point that if you know, over this compacting arrangement, that the ministry, in my view, need to get proactive and be positive about possibilities here of solving more than just delivering education, but beginning to solve you know, the need for success for Native Alaskans. It's got an economic outcome. It's got a cultural outcome, and you know, the socio-economic benefits are really important. You know, I keep saying it, that they can't make any inroads into the socio-economic underdevelopment of our communities without a simultaneous educational revolution. They're locked together. So if they're serious about dealing with this issue, the broader issue of their socio-economic development, and this goes for probably some of our own foundations and sources without overreaching here, is that they need to see that link between education and socio-economic development. And this is not a giveaway. That, you know, it's not giving money to education and it's going down a drain hole. It's a huge investment in the improvement in our socio-economic conditions of communities. The more success we can engender at schooling level. So it's a challenge for everyone. And there may be possibilities around this of, so I don't know how the compact that you're thinking of works, but I have had some experience with the Micronesian compact, which the government was suggesting they were trying to finish in at least 3 years ago, I think, in Micronesia, which was a compact struck after the Second World War to help with the damage that was done to the islands by the war. And what had happened there was that the islands, many of them weren't ready. They didn't have the wherewithal to continue on with the education compact that they had. So they were just supplied a mainstream education, access to the United States curriculum. So it might be a different situation. So I'm not sure how you're envisaging compacting in Alaska, but might be worthwhile having a look at what Micronesia, different islands in Micronesia have experienced.
We had
the other thing is in the compacting stuff is, I don't know how well wired, although Kotzebue was really good for me. So it was 20 below, snowing, and and I still watched rugby in the sunshine in New Zealand on my computer. But it's the fibre access to the villages and stuff like that can actually change the whole world in terms of access to education in the world. You know, so different things that might be struck in a compact important.
Yeah. Can make a lot of requests in that compact for sure. Lolly Karpluk had asked a question in the chat on Facebook, and she was hoping you would talk more about the Maori teacher education preparation programs. She said, do both Aotearoa conventional universities and Taiwan, I can't pronounce Taiwananga.
Yes, yeah, no, I
Have their own.
understand. Yeah, Lali. Oh, hello, Lali, if you're there. Good to hear from you. And the School of Fish, that's all my friends who are in the teacher education group in Alaska there. But yes, Lali's right that some of these programs are in formal institutions. So I'm working in currently in the university near my home here, and we have a Kurapapa Maori teacher training program there. Still underfunded in our view, but as I say, we have but all the teachers are taught a different program. The Kurapapa Maori they do their placement in Kurapapa Maori. They're taught through the medium of Māori language, and they're taught by Kurapapa Maori specialists. We have another teaching program which is community-based, and which is in a different in Auckland, and same thing. They're taught by Māori teachers who have experience in these schools. So they're different, and they maintain the philosophy and te aho matua, the philosophy of these schools, in the way in which they organize their teaching.
Can we send all of our teachers to you?
They're all going to want to go to New Zealand.
I thought Lali was sorting that out.
Yeah, definitely. There's definitely good people working on it here, and I guess that brings me back to one of my first. Oh, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say there's lots of good people. You know, as you can see from those slides, I've met a lot of people in Alaska, and Alaska is well positioned in terms of good people who've got the wherewithal to figure this stuff out. And you know, I just think it's a bubble waiting to burst.
I wanted to ask you about a couple kind of two related things, just building off of what you were just talking about. And one has to do with I'm trying to think about how to frame this. Right now, we have a lot of people who have experienced what I would call like approximate success in the current Western system that we have.
Yep.
And because of that, because they've been able to achieve some type of success within it, there's a reluctance to turn an eye of trust to our tribal peoples and our tribal leadership, and to believe in our ability to create schools that reflect who we are.
Yep.
And I'm sure you must have encountered this and had these same kind of conversations as you folks were going through your process. And I wonder if you could share maybe some insights about how you worked with that.
Yeah, no, they're absolutely. They're seduced by the system and the success that they've had in the system, and they're often co-opted by the system as a blockage and to provide this sort of gatekeeping, if you like, of the system, and held up as the models. Look at so and so; they've been successful in this, in the system as it stands. You know, why can't you? And of course, it just holds up the idea that kids, they have deficits and that's why they fail. It's something wrong with these other kids. And of course, this is all part of, have to understand some of this stuff in relation to the new forms of colonization and in relation to the way in which neoliberalism is working. So because a significant way in which the colonization has been reformed is off the back of this of the neoliberal politics. So a lot of this is about choice theory. So choice theory sort of goes, the reason that you people aren't succeeding is you had choice and you made the wrong choices. So why should we worry about you? And they fail to see the whole structural impediment that's in place that has led to that situation. And so that sort of hegemony is picked up by people who've had some success in the system, been seduced by it, and start to repeat the dominant worldview perspective. So it's an issue that, again, it's one of those things that we just need to say, kia ora, good on you, good luck, you've done well. But we've got a lot of our communities that also need to do well, and we need to find the pathway that suits them. Get on with your lives and get out of our face. In many ways, you know, because they also want to have a say, you know, over what happens to the rest. They say that they're successful in a particular system, then kapai, that's where their success and their talent lies. That's where they should remain. Stop interfering with trying to solve the other. And part of this is, if you haven't got a good idea of or a response to making a difference, and you're invested in the status quo, then that's doing no good to anybody. Nothing's going to change. And so for many of those, they just need to get out of the road and let others who've got a vested interest in making change get on with it.
Well, and maybe as we look at the amount of time we've kept you here with us, because we want to just keep asking you all these questions, I wanted to ask if you had some words of support or guidance to our Native people who are doing really incredible work and who, quite frankly, have been saying this stuff for decades. And just, you know, they say you can't be a prophet to your own people, but they've literally been here with blistered hands trying to do this against a system that, of course, is not budging, because the system has no motivation to change because they're getting the outcome that it wants. And so we have amazing people who just need support, affirmation. They, you know, and if you have any words for them, I think that would be really wonderful.
Absolutely, and that was the point I was making before about that. There's some amazing individuals and groups in Alaska who are doing wonderful things, and I think that was one of the first points I made, is that actually you've got the talent and the wherewithal to do something different. Not for me to say what that different thing should be. I've shared with you what we have done. There's some elements that you can co-opt and that fit well, and that translate well into your environment as well. And there's some elements that don't do that so well. But you've got good thinkers and people who already have done things on the ground, who've got the parts of this, including the cultural standards. You know, in responding to the standardized system, you've got a whole curriculum, and you know that's there. You can build off that. It doesn't have to be absolutely have everything done now, but you could. It's a hell of a start. As I say, other countries are using that already. And then you've got the you know, on the North Slope, the different things going on. You've got is it Ilsevik College that, you know, with where Pearl was, that you know, they've got some of the foundational elements. It needs then again, if you can bring it all together, it's great. But absolutely endorse that. You've got the parts, and you've got the significant component of the people power that's in place. Communities need to start to think also about the need to take on the idea of transforming education. Because it's not just about transforming education. When you link, it's about transforming the socio-economic existence of our communities to education success. It becomes vitally important. So everyone is in this. And again, I'll say to those that are who are in the system, in the ministry, that actually could save yourselves a lot of pain by getting on board early and doing trying to work with communities to solve some of these things in a positive and proactive way, and not have to go the long trail that will probably, because of the will of the people, end up in the right place. But we could all just journey on this on the short trail very quickly together.
Well, I keep wanting to just keep going with you, but I know that we have you for a couple more sessions at least. So I want to make sure that you get a break too. You've been going strong here for over 2 hours. And I cannot thank you enough. You know, we know that the roots of this linkage between us is ancient, that the Pacific has always brought us together, and that our leaders have been together. Our education leaders have been inspiring. Our Alaskan education leaders have been inspiring other Indigenous people globally, but we haven't been able to get that traction in our own homelands, and you know why.
Yeah, but profit in your own land.
Yeah, yeah, and it's so amazing to just be able to hear your story of your people's experience in asserting that self-determination over the education of their children, their families, and more than that, because when I came down there, it wasn't just Maori who were benefiting from this. No. It was a mixture of all the people who were living there who also wanted to have a same wonderful experience in education for their children.
Yep, you're quite right, Liz. New Zealand has one. The whole of the country, as I say, no one died. Everyone is feeling actually tremendously happy that actually we've got these responses now, that Māori are more comfortable in the space that they're in with education with this. There's still issues, but we're a lot more comfortable than we were. And I think people feel good that things are being tried and that we're not just standing still.
Yeah, thank you so much. Goodness, Tish, how Hinangaroa. So mad that I just want on fire right now at the system for continuously telling our children they're less than because they don't fit a mold that is not their own. And I'm so thankful for what you you lit a flame in me, and I know so many people who listened, as to what can be possible. And I am just grateful. You're going to set me on a path and a trajectory that I know that we can all get on together. And hopefully this will help others see too, those who are still struggling to come along this path, whether they be our own people or whether they be folks who are still pendering the Western system as the only system way of thinking. Hopefully they can start to see a little bit differently now what can be possible when we start thinking about things and thinking about the success of these systems in a different way as they contribute to our children. So thank you for helping us see that our children are valuable, that these systems are telling them that they're not, and the systems are wrong, not our children. So I'm so grateful for your words today.
And I want to add to everyone who's been joining us, and on the Facebook stream, we're having lots of people respond and just appreciate the time that you're spending with us. And you know, many of them are your friends, as you heard from some of these questions already. But I want to just make sure to let everyone know that we have 2 more of these sessions. The next one is going to be on February 15th from 2 to 4, again with Henangaroa and Bentham Ohia. And we're going to get more into the self-determination aspect of the work that has happened in Aotearoa to continue to help fill out our good thinking as Alaska Native people and leaders involved in education, to start thinking about how this transforming work could really uplift Alaska as a whole. And then the 3rd session will be February 18th. That's a Friday evening from 7 to 9 p.m. And we'll have Henangaroa and his wife, Professor Linda Smith, with us. Kune, Lance Twitchell will be with us. Lisa Wade will be with us. Pasarok Harchark will be with us. And Julie Kitka will be with us for that 3rd session as well. So we want to make sure to invite everyone who's watching to tune in for that as well. This has been recorded, so it will be on our First Alaskans Institute Facebook page, so you can keep watching it or share it with others, please. And then we'll also put it over on our First Alaskans Institute YouTube page for those people who don't actually, get down with the Facebook and want to be able to access it somewhere else. It'll be on YouTube for folks to watch there. And we'll do the same with the next couple sessions as well. So with that, we're going to close out our time together for this session. And again, so much for spending your time with us today. And we look forward to the next 2 sessions.
Thank you. Kia ora.